1812, the year the United States went to war against the British Empire. The conflict that would be known as the Epic War of 1812 was one of America's most pivotal moments in its young history, and we were there for all of it. From the American perspective, the war began in June 1812 with the declaration of war by President James Madison. This was a bold move as the U.S. had not yet reached its full potential as a global power. But the Americans were confident they could win a war against the world's greatest military force. The British were caught off guard by the declaration of war, and even more surprised by the American invasion of Canada. The British did their best to defend their northern territories, but they were woefully underprepared for such an invasion. The Americans made some early gains, but soon found themselves bogged down in the Canadian wilderness. In August, a large American force attempted to capture Montreal, but was defeated by a smaller British force. The Americans were forced to retreat south, leaving behind their wounded and dead. One of those left behind was American General Stephen Van Rensselaer, who died from his wounds a few days later. After the failed invasion of Montreal, the Americans decided to focus their efforts on capturing the British naval base at Kingston. If successful, this would open the door to the rest of Canada. But once again, the Americans were met with fierce resistance from the British. A small British force, led by Major General Isaac Brock, managed to defeat a much larger American force at the Battle of Queenston Heights. This was a devastating blow to the Americans and their hopes of capturing Kingston. With their army defeated, the Americans were forced to retreat back across the border into the United States. As the winter months approached, both sides prepared for a long and bloody conflict. The British knew they were facing a determined enemy and began to reinforce their positions in Canada. Meanwhile, the Americans were in a state of chaos. Their army was demoralized after a series of defeats, and there was no clear plan for how to win the war. It seemed as though the British were invincible and the Americans were on the verge of defeat. But then something unexpected happened. In the midst of all this chaos, a group of American soldiers stood up to the British and won a decisive victory at the Battle of New Orleans. This was a turning point in the war and gave the Americans hope that they could win. Under the leadership of General Andrew Jackson, the American forces were able to defeat the British and drive them out of New Orleans. This victory gave the Americans a much-needed boost in morale, and they were able to carry that momentum into the rest of the war. They launched a series of attacks against the British in an attempt to capture Canada. The British were able to hold off the Americans for a time, but eventually they were forced to surrender. In August of 1814, the British and Americans met together in Ghent to sign the Treaty of Ghent. This treaty ended the war and restored the pre-war boundaries between the United States and British Canada. Despite the signing of the treaty, fighting continued until February 1815, when news of the treaty finally reached the front lines. The war may have been over, but the epic battles and heroic deeds of the soldiers would live on in American memory. The Americans had proven that they could stand toe-to-toe with the best military force in the world and come out on top. This gave them the confidence to take on any challenge in the future. What if I told you there was a way you could experience these epic battles for yourself without ever leaving your home? Imagine being able to relive the most pivotal moments in American history through the eyes of the soldiers who fought in them. Now close your eyes and imagine what it must have been like to be an American soldier in the early 1800s. You're part of a small group of men who have volunteered to fight in the war against the British. Your mission is to march across the wilderness and capture the vital British naval base at Kingston. You can feel the rough terrain beneath your feet as you and your fellow soldiers make the long trek through the woods. The journey is long and arduous, but you are fueled by the promise of glory and victory. As you approach Kingston, you know that you're about to face the enemy. The stakes are high and the battle will be fierce, but you are ready. You have trained for this moment, and you are prepared to do whatever it takes to win. When the battle begins, you can hear the clash of swords and the roar of cannons. You see the determination on the faces of your fellow soldiers as they fight bravely for their country. The tension is palpable, and the outcome of the battle is uncertain. But in the end, it is your courage and determination that leads your team to victory. As you stand amidst the chaos of battle, you know that you have just played an important role in securing your country's future. The feeling of accomplishment is unlike anything you have ever experienced before. And as the sun sets on the battlefield, you can't help but feel a sense of pride knowing that you were a part of this historic event. Now open your eyes and let the experience sink in. Close your eyes again and imagine what it would have been like to be a British soldier during the War of 1812. This time you find yourself in the midst of a fierce battle against the American invaders. You and your fellow redcoats are defending your post when suddenly the Americans launch a surprise attack. The scene is pure chaos. You hear the deafening roar of cannons and the panicked cries of wounded soldiers. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Adrenaline pumps through your veins as you grip your musket tightly. It's every man for himself now. You dodge incoming cannon fire and return volley after volley to the advancing Americans. The battle rages on, and you and your comrades dig in to defend your position. Despite the ferocity of the fight, the Americans simply refuse to back down. They come at you wave after wave, each one more determined than the last. As the hours pass, you begin to feel the toll that the battle is taking on you. Your clothes are torn and caked in mud. Your face is streaked with dirt and sweat. But you push on, fueled by nothing but sheer willpower. Finally, the tide of battle turns in your favor. The Americans, exhausted and depleted, begin to fall back. You and your fellow redcoats have held your ground and defended your post against all odds. As the smoke clears and the sounds of battle fade away, you survey the scene around you. The ground is littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers, both British and American. You take a moment to pay your respects to your fallen comrades, and then you turn your attention to the task at hand. There is still much work to be done. The war is far from over, but you know that you and your fellow redcoats are up to the task. You have proven yourselves to be brave, disciplined, and resolute in the face of any challenge. As you look out over the battlefield, you feel a sense of pride and camaraderie. You and your fellow redcoats may be outnumbered and outgunned, but you are also fiercely determined and united in your purpose. Together, you will face whatever challenges lie ahead and defend the colors with your life. The War of 1812 to 1815, was fought mainly between the United States and Britain, over trade restrictions, impressment of American sailors, and territorial disputes. The battle between the USS Constitution and the HMS Guerriere was one of the most intense naval engagements of the War of 1812. It's not related to the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783. It was part of the War of 1812 specifically. The two ships fought fiercely for control of the seas off the coast of North America. The Constitution, nicknamed Old Ironsides, was a powerful American vessel with a strong crew and a heavy load of cannons. The Guerriere, on the other hand, was a nimble British ship that relied on its speed and agility to outmaneuver its opponents. The battle began with the Guerriere opening fire on the Constitution, but the American ship was able to dodge the incoming cannonballs with ease. The Constitution then returned fire, and within minutes, the Guerriere was on fire. The British ship's masts were shot down and its hull was riddled with holes. The Guerriere's crew fought bravely, but they were ultimately defeated by the superior firepower of the Constitution. The surviving members of the Guerriere's crew were taken prisoner by the Americans, and the battle was a major morale boost for the United States. It showed that the fledgling Navy was capable of standing up to the mighty Royal Navy. The burning of Washington, D.C. was a devastating event that occurred during the War of 1812. The British military, led by Major General Robert Ross, marched into the city and set fire to several important government buildings, including the White House and the Capitol. The attack came as a shock to the Americans, who had not expected the British to target the capital city. The burning of Washington, D.C. was intended to be a message to the United States that Britain was capable of striking at any moment. The destruction caused by the fire was immense, and it took years to repair the damage. But the event also had a profound impact on the American psyche. The burning of Washington, D.C. was a symbol of the vulnerability of the young nation. It was a reminder that the United States was still at risk of invasion, and that the people needed to be constantly vigilant. The attack on Washington, D.C. remains one of the most infamous events of the War of 1812. It was a devastating blow to the United States, and a stark reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. As the war dragged on, both sides grew increasingly desperate. The British began to focus on capturing Lake Erie in order to cut off supplies to the Americans. The Americans, meanwhile, were determined to hold on to the lake and prevent the British from gaining the upper hand. In September 1813, the two sides met in a decisive battle on Lake Erie. The American fleet, led by Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, was outnumbered but well equipped. The British fleet, on the other hand, was larger but poorly coordinated. The battle was fierce, but in the end, the Americans were victorious. The British were forced to retreat, giving the Americans control of Lake Erie. This victory was a turning point in the war. It allowed the Americans to continue receiving supplies and reinforcements, which helped them to keep fighting. The Treaty of Ghent was the peace treaty that ended the War of 1812 between the United States and Great Britain. The treaty was signed on December 24, 1814, and it restored the pre-war boundaries between the two countries. The treaty was a compromise. Neither side was able to achieve all of its goals, but both sides were willing to settle for peace. The war had been costly in terms of lives and resources, and both sides were eager to end the conflict. One of the key provisions of the treaty was the restoration of the pre-war boundaries. This meant that the Americans were able to keep all of the territory that they had gained during the war. The treaty also included a number of other provisions, such as the release of prisoners and the return of property. Overall, the Treaty of Ghent was a fair and reasonable resolution to the War of 1812. It allowed the United States and Great Britain to restore their relationship and focus on other issues. If you enjoyed reliving these epic moments in History Revealed channel, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. Thank you for watching. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Till next video, enjoy your time. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the past.